Mr. President of Fit North America, with us.
Yes, so pleased to be able to attend and so grateful to Sergio and his team for arranging this series of webinars. And
Well, in this case, it was Tanya and her team, and I'm part of her team today. It was all her baby, and it was all her doing. So we
thank you.
support it.
Thank you, Tanya.
Yes.
Thank you, Tanya. Let me just take 10 seconds to tell everyone who is here that we hope that you check out the conference that Fit North America is putting on in Monterey, California, the first week of October. And maybe if the emails of people who registered, maybe you can send them a link to the conference website afterwards.
Will do. I will do it again and check with everybody so we can go to the next gen in Monterey, California.
Thank you.
So,
and now I turn it back to you for this.
Thank you. But I just
webinar.
wanted to acknowledge your presence here.
The reason is because a lot of people are coming in and we won't want them to lose the first time. So welcome to our series of webinar of the Colegio Mexicano de Intérpretes de Conferencias and Fit North America. This is something that we have committed. And this is the team formed by Tania, Lorena, also Monica, and who always helps us. And we have decided that the important topics in the profession should be exposed and presented before everyone. It's a way of having a continuous education to which mostly all of the interpreters don't have acknowledged. We have brought to you what we have found better, and for this that we call continuous education and to open the horizon of the Colegio Mexicano de Intérpretes de Conferencias to other latitudes and other topics that gives us as a consequence for this webinar of today. Please, I beg you, all the interpreters, this means everyone, I respect the language and I ask everyone to please send us your suggestions, even if you have seen that month after month after month after month. We have interest topics. Some are more interesting. Some you think that are some boring things, and some are very interesting things. We are depleting the topic, we keep on looking and looking, and we want to find ad hoc speakers. So very soon we're going to do one about the interpreter in politics. This is so important. We're going to have interpreters that have, or we have worked at a presidential level, and also prime ministers and so forth, and how the interpreter should behave in politics, and the person and the professional that has to keep a respect. This is something that we will bring you very soon as a round table. This will not be a webinar, but a round table. Today, we will talk about something that is called over-the-phone interpretation. This does not mean intellectual property organization, but it means over-the-phone interpretation, which means to do interpretation over the phone. This is a very controversial topic that we have at present, and many people don't consider it as interpretation. They say, let's say gender. No. They are so wrong. So this is why before I have a little greater mess, I want to pass the floor to Tania Saldivar, who was the promoter of this successful webinar, and she will introduce us with the person that we're going to talk from Canada directly, and why we are immersed in this alternate world to the conference interpretation. Tania, you have the floor, and thanks everyone for your attendance, and we are having a record of attendance in our webinar. Thank you, Tania. The floor is yours. Thank you, Ana Pao, but I wanted to introduce Tania. Thank you so much, Sergio. And yes, we have the pleasure of having with us Ana Paula Reyes. She's going to introduce a great speech about over the phone interpretation and about program interpretation. And as Sergio says, many times it's not considered as an interpretation, and we have to set clear standards to talk about this and to be able to have a correct vision and to do something better for the profession. Ana Paola is a certificate interpreter in conference interpretation and also in communitary interpretation in Mexico and in Canada as well. She is a bachelor in languages and modern English literatures from UNAM and the master degree of interpretation of the University of Geneva in Switzerland. She works as a manager of production and quality assurance in the company 911 Interpreters in the province of Ontario in Canada. She has over 20 years of experience in interpreting conferences and also community interpretation, and she's a lover of the formation of interpreters and also of the profession of interpretation. Her passion is to use her experience in the environment of interpretation, conference interpretation, and communitary interpretation in order to accelerate and to generate awareness and to widen the knowledge about the branches of remote interpretation, over the phone interpretation, and video interpretation. Thank you so much, Ana Pao, for being here with us today and to have been able to set this so important topic on the table and that you can share with us your wide knowledge to this respect. So I'll give you the floor. And I remind you, everyone, that we have English interpretation and Mexican sign languages interpretation, or you can listen to the interpretation in Spanish or the speaker in Spanish. Thank you, Ana Paula, you're muted. Your microphone is muted. Okay, ready? Now, hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today, Tania, Sergio. Oh, this is a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you everyone for being here with us today. I want this to be a talk like a family talk. This is a topic that really gets to my heart because after having been a conference interpreter and to get to the world of community interpretation and also over the phone interpretation, I perfectly understand the controversies, the doubts, the fears that we all have had with respect to community interpretation or public services interpretation. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here with you and to start sharing. I'm going to start sharing the presentation. I hope that you can see it. Can you see it? Okay. Tania, in a wonderful, wonderful way, described this as a parallel universe. And yes, it's a parallel universe because we are interpreters. Community interpreters and conference interpreters are in another universe. We are in an alternate world taking care of different needs and different groups. So before anything else, I want to invite you to greet the elephant because at the end of the story is the moment of talking about the topic. As Sergio said in the introduction, this is the way and the moment to get open, to open the scope of our profession and to be humble enough to say, what is this? But I'm interested to know it. And you are my cousin or my brother in this parallel universe. And I'm really interested to know you and to see where and how can I help you. For me, it's a great honor to talk about this elephant that is here to stay and that we have in front of us. I know that many of you are thinking, seriously? Are we talking about this branch that it's really, are they interpreters or not? The quality of their interpretation, they are only bilingual. They are patito or not very good agencies, as we say in Mexico, patito. But why do we have to talk about this in this moment? Because we have to have topics of professional development in the conference. So I invite you that at this moment, we have to think that the interpreter is much more than not only the conference. Let's think about the scope that we can have if we accept that our profession is bigger than what we thought. And besides, technology is opening us a road. The true reason for which we are talking today about this is because the world changed and it overpassed us and it threw us, and we say, okay, in pandemic, conditions change, but the reality is that technology has advanced faster than we thought. I still use this kind of phones where you have to dial, and if I got mistaken in a number, I had to restart. And look, now we are looking at each other from different places of the world, and we are all united and gathered as a family. We cannot deny that the world has changed and that we cannot close the gates and say, no, 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 everything is the same. I want to remain the same, because then we would be like this phone. We won't have the scope nor the development that we expect. So then, I know what's coming next. This topic is difficult. So, are you technical or are you tough? Okay, we're going to do the conditions or the lack of working conditions. And I understand that it has been a topic that has generated a lot of controversy. I promise you that I'm going to try to approach the greater part of these conferences during this mini speech, but I invite you to pose questions. Tanya will keep them, but please ask everything that you want, because now it's the moment to open and take advantage of this controversy, because it generates emotions. And simply and plainly, the fact that it generates an emotion, either good or bad, does not matter. This emotion, this energy is what I want to take advantage of, and I want everyone to take it out so we can take advantage of this first introductory section about OPI or VRI, and to talk about all these doubts and all this baggage that we do not understand, so we can advance, and then we can understand that we are generating part of the problem, and this is part of knowledge. So many times what causes us the greater conflict in the world is what concerns us. Generally speaking, the human being is scared of change. We say that we are used to change. We say that we are used to situation, and that it's summer, and that mainly in Canada, where I'm living, the seasons are very marked and the changes are very marked. And we say, okay, we achieved the change. Autumn's coming, the falling leaves and winter, and then everything will be born again. But in reality, there are changes that the human being thinks is very difficult. We have to open the doors to those things that we don't know. By human nature, this is something very, very good, and I live it in my own flesh. And for those of you who do not know me, I want to talk a little bit about me so you can understand who I am and why today I am the defender #1 of community over the phone and video interpretation. I started my career as a conference interpreter in Mexico, and after that, to look for a better life for my daughter, we came to live to Canada. And then I met the world of community interpretation. I'm not going to deny that at the beginning, when I started working in community interpretation, I was ashamed of saying that I was working in community interpretation. All the people, when I got here to look for the accreditation, to work in the conference with the federal government, to work with high levels of Canada, the first thing that they told me was, give me a moment. If you want to be conference interpreter of high level, you are in another level. The only thing that we're going to ask you is to please don't say, not even remotely, that you work in community interpretation. I started working in community interpretation as an agent in a contact center, in a call center interpreter. And this was what gave me the first incomes and what keeps on giving me the stable income in order to live in this country that, as you know, is very expensive. And I was in this duality of I need to work, I need money while I work as a conference interpreter, because when you go to another country, you are nothing. And I said, I'm Ana Paula Reyes, and say, oh, cool. And you know, are anyone here? And I started from scratch and I said, God, please help me, because the only thing that I know how to do is to interpret. I can try to go to other areas, but I won't achieve it. I'm an interpreter. And lastly, I found a beautiful niche where I can interpret, maybe in a different way, but I can interpret. And that everyone told me, no, 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 don't do that. This was very difficult at the beginning, and this was the first reason to learn about the topic. And now, what's a person in a call center? Because you can see that there are a lot of people working, taking calls from customers, and the customers are in different offices, mainly social services or clinics. And it's an area that has developed in mainly the medical area. And when I started in this, that several years have gone by, there were agents that took those calls directly from the customers, and they got for an available interpreter in the language. If it was in Spanish, I interpreted them. And if not, then I got another interpreter from other language and I connected the call. That was my work at the beginning, but technology is so developed that they can take it directly. So I'm going to talk about this later on. What I want to tell you is that you are so right. The first days, you cannot imagine how difficult it was. You cannot imagine. I was exhausted and I said, I'm a conference interpreter. Please, come on. I know that this is very simple. We are interpreting with conference, with calls, and unfortunately, and I have to confess, I had this idea of over the phone interpretation. This is so simple. It's something very easy to do. No, 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 come on. I can do it. So easy. Oh, it's like a piece of cake. I cannot explain. I cannot tell you how difficult it was. The exhaust level after 1 hour. I was so tired. When I had shifts of 8 hours, you cannot imagine how exhausted I was. This is inhuman. There cannot be a person that can do this. How? Oh, come on. This is really like exploitation to the interpreters, and this is impossible. So I noticed that it was not the work, it was myself. It was myself. I was doing everything incorrect. And I wanted to do what I did before in a parallel universe. And I thought this was abuse, but it was myself. I had to work in a different way. And I had to say, Ana Paula, you have to understand that this is another universe that you do not know. And you're going to start from scratch. And I studied and I had to do research and to grow in the world of community interpretation. I know that it's always very difficult for conference interpreters. I said, I'm going to study community interpretation. And they said, what? Why do you need to invest time, effort, money to take some credits as a community interpreter, to take certificates as a community interpreter, if you're already an interpreter, a conference interpreter? And I did not understand exactly before why. I only understood what I was doing. It was not working, and I had to change my mindset. So when I started studying and learning, it was when I noticed that knowledge is the key. And this is what I want to share with you today. Just a tiny bit of curiosity in order for us to learn to see this world in a different way with a new key under a new light, because only in that way we can grow and be better. And then, well, yeah, I want to do an analogy that for me is very clear, and I hope that it's so clear for you as well. Imagine that at this moment we're going to talk about interpretation as if interpreting was to transport yourself in a vehicle, in a different vehicle. Let's think about the different vehicles that we have to transport ourselves. Okay, biking, and has two wheels, or it can also be a motorcycle, or it can be an automobile for the city, for the road. But also we have Formula One cars, the high-speed cars. All these are transportations. Let's think that in interpretation, all this can be different universe or modalities or kinds of interpretation. One of the first questions or doubts that emerge when we try to compare community with conference interpreting is that they have to be accumulative abilities, as if we were constructing with Lego. You can do sorry. You can do over the phone. If I add another one, I can do video. And if I add another piece, and I can do consecutive, and then I can do simultaneous or conference. No, that's not right. Unfortunately, not always the abilities that you require are piled. There are some that are, but there are some that can be transferred, but there are others that no. And there are others that only apply to go bike riding or for other kind of interpretation like driving in Formula One. Obviously, a person that knows how to ride a bike not necessarily knows how to drive a car. But if a person that knows how to drive a Formula One vehicle not necessarily knows how to ride a bike. And this is where I said, okay, let's start recognizing each and every one of these groups as independent. And guess what I did? Yes, we think that it's simultaneous conference, for example, in policies, as Sergio was mentioning, to drive a vehicle, a Formula One vehicle. Well, I wanted to interpret as if I would be driving a Formula One vehicle when I had to be riding a bike. You know what happened? I fell and I fell and I fell and I fell over and over again. Why? Because I was not doing what I had to do. And then, okay, let's go now to see which are the modalities. And you're going to say, okay, in cars, yeah, I understand, but in interpretation, it's totally different. No, 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 no. Let's see. Let's think that interpretation can be divided in two main universes: conference and community interpretation, or public service interpretation. We have called in many countries public service interpretation because in reality, the main objective is to help the people that talk a language that it's a minority in that country or in that society to have public services, like legal services, where this is the court interpreters, or public services like doctors. All the health and medical interpreters participate, or other social services in countries of high migration levels of social care, assistance, and so forth. So this would be like the first great division between these two universes. Let's stop thinking in the conference as such, and let's start thinking in community interpretation. I understand that in Mexico, we're not just thinking in public services or community interpretation. And I want to say that it makes me feel very, very sad, because it's not for lack of need. In Mexico, we have a great quantity of indigenous languages and people that need interpretation in these languages. We have overlooked them very badly, terribly. This community interpretation area should exist in our country and should be supported by the government. And this is my very personal perspective and my very personal opinion. But in countries like Australia, Europe, Sweden, the United States, and Canada, there are countries where community interpretation has grown a lot for the migration phenomenon. But I insist that in Mexico, it should exist in some way or the other. And yeah, very sadly, it's a service that many times is not financed by the government. And this is the government policies which implement that it's compulsory to give services in the languages of minorities. And I think that, well, this is another change that we have to do and another road that we have to travel in. So let's start thinking. I'm talking about a kind of interpretation that we almost don't know. It's not conference, it's not diplomatic interpretation. It's more addressed to the human being, to the individual. So if we divide it in the interpretation, how can we interpret in this different universe? In the universe of conference is the one that we know the most. Maybe we have many here, We love simultaneous interpretation. Mainly in Mexico, we are very just that we can do everything with simultaneous interpretation, and we have forgotten a little bit and left aside the practice of consecutive in the diplomatic area, where we think that the interpreter may interpret segments of 5 minutes or even a little bit more. In some occasions, this long consecutive is much more common in Europe, and here in Canada, it's a model of consecutive interpretation. And this is a longer interpretation that many times we have the access of recurring to the simultaneous interpretation and very little occasions, mainly in diplomatic surroundings, we use a consecutive, but never like so. So then, in the area of community interpretation and public services, we are used to doing more short consecutive or shushotash. And then this is like shushotash or whispering, which is a model, an attempt of simultaneous interpretation that is near the speaker or the person that requires to do the interpretation. And it's a model that's used, but not as frequently as we would think. We use even more the short consecutive, and we use it like in the courtroom. Now, if we reduce all these universes and we go back to the topic of today, which is telephone, over the phone interpretation, and I want to leave this very clear. I'm deciding for VRI or video remote interpreting. I'm almost going exclusively to video interpretation. And I get an interpreter, and then there's the OPI and the VRI that I'm going to talk about now. These two modalities are only in the community interpretation, and mainly we have developed it even more in medical interpretation. So this is something that we have developed, and it has grown a lot. And it's very, very used in the United States, and those are the customers that hire interpreters in Mexico. And for other services, mainly, as I was saying, social interpreting. Once more, main difference and a very big one. Who are we addressing the interpretation? It can be addressed to executives, while the community interpretation to you, to me, if I would decided to go to Russia and I'm sick, I would love to have an interpreter that could help me at the hospital. So we understand these differences, and
We're
we
going
will
to see the
see.
story of the community interpretation. As we said, community came up in these countries with a lot of ethnic minorities. There are not a great number of versions, the ones that are recognized by the government. The main objective is to help them in public services. There's a lot of interpretation and education. Many of the clients are schools to help parents, and interviews with the parents and the teachers, and according to third generations that are going in different countries. And this began mainly as an in-person modalities. So community interpretation, everything I've mentioned as community interpretation for public services began originally simply with the interpreters going personally to a school, to the hospital, to the immigration office, have an appointment with somebody that did not speak the local language, and they would ask for an interpreter. They would make an appointment. The interpreter would go there, and that was the only way that we were able to do their meeting or their interview. However, with the evolution of the telephone began to become an alternative mainly when the need grew, where there's greater demand because there's greater migration, but there's no more qualified interpreters, or simply there's not more interpreters. So the telephone solves the need because the person can take the call instead of having to go to another town or another city where the service is required. At the beginning, these same calls were programmed, and as time has gone by, they began to have contact centers or call centers, as I mentioned before. And this grew very quickly. And we're going to see what this is. I'm going to explain a little bit more about how interpretation, on-demand phone, and VRI interpretation works. First, we need to understand what are the different parties that are involved. And this is terminology that I left in English because normally that's the way it's used in this area of interpretation. If you afterward hear me these terms, it's because these are adopted Anglicisms. So normally we have ISPs, which are the interpreting services providers. So they're the people that provide interpretation services. In other words, the agencies. So these are the agencies for community interpretation that can provide interpretation services personally on the phone or by video. There's almost always a supplier of services, as I normally said. These are people that require interpretation are providing a service for the medical service, migration services, educational services, but these are providers of services. So they're the service provider or the requester. The requester is the person that are asking for the services known most when you receive a phone call, either a video call or a phone call. Normally, there's a person that is normally known as the LEP. That is a limited English proficient person, which is a person that has a limited level of English, that speaks another language, and that requires help and an interpreter. And how does this work? As I said, we can think of a doctor. He's in his office, and the next patient to come in does not speak English. They speak Spanish. So at that time, the doctor will take his phone or device with video functioning, dial, as I said before, they would dial the agency. There was an agent that would connect the call. But today, these platforms have evolved so much that interpreters can be at home, connected to the service platform, and wherever they are, they can receive the call directly from the client. So this is why I'm saying that the call can go directly from the requester to the interpreter. Interpreter takes the call, introduces themselves, and they introduce themselves to the LEP, and the interpretation begins. The requester speaks in the target language, and the interpreter hears it and translates it to the other language, and so on. That's it. That's the only thing that happens in interpretation. The call is over and the session is over. Now, what are these calls and how were they? How are they today? We're going to talk about that now. First, here we can begin to see our questions and controversies arising. I know right now you might think, okay, yeah, but how are the interpreters connected? But how are they taking the calls? But how often? I know all these questions begin to arise. We're going to look at them little by little. But first, I want to tell you how it was in the past, where it was not always the best, how it is today, and how I see the future. And I hope that the future will be even better. So we're going to think of the past. Originally, these were programmed calls. At the beginning, as I said, everything was done in person, and it was very few phone calls. Almost always, it was to confirm an appointment, to see if the patient was going to go or not, to confirm attendance on an immigration appointment, to confirm the patient's data, the other person's data. It was very brief calls. That was a very simple interpretation. And yes, very often children would do it. We have this story where the children are the ones that were the interpreters for their parents, the family members, anybody that more or less, as if they could speak the language, would act as an interpreter. It was the interpreters that were going in person to provide services. And unfortunately, at the beginning, there was not a lot of education. There was a lot of lack of knowledge about codes of ethics and the necessary protocols that were required. And interpreters would take the call, whether on fixed phone lines or landlines, or in the first mobile devices, with everything that was involved there with the quality of audio, etc. But what has happened? All of this has evolved, and today calls are not just to confirm an appointment. Yes, you do have some, but not very many, especially in on-demand services. These are complete medical appointments. It's a full interview to see if they can give the person social services, economic aid, to see if they can stay legally in the country or not. A lot of support is given to medical institutions, to hospital institutions. There could be interpretation even in the recovery room at the end of an operation. And before the patient receives anesthesia, they want to talk to them, especially there's a lot of calls for emergency services naturally. Just imagine if there's an emergency, somebody comes in, they need to communicate with the person that is injured, they don't speak the language. So it's really important to have this service. And also police services. So there's been exponential growth in the scope of this, but interpreters have also grown. Interpreters now have more education. Interpreters, conference interpreters, rather, communities interpreters and telephone interpreters do have certifications. I know that perhaps it's not well known, but there are certifications. And if not, they need to at least certify they have knowledge of the language. We need to follow ethical codes that are very different, even though it's the same profession, that are focused on different aspects than you normally see in conference interpretation. There are protocols that are very different also, just because one of the main aspects of the telephone interpreters to provide service to a client, you have to give customer service and to be connected to those platforms that I'm mentioning, where they also need to be aware of technologies in their home and how they're taking phone calls and of having the right internet service. And their education covers areas that normally we would not consider in conference interpreting. So this is the present. There has been an evolution. Evolution has been positive. I can swear that that is the case. But there might going to be people that still have questions in their mind. I don't think so, they would say. I don't really think that this is the case because there's some talent hunting campaigns where they're hiring anybody that's bilingual. They don't ask for any experience. They're not asking for any education. They don't ask for any certification. They just hire them. Well, let's talk about that then. Education. Yes, it's really important to have education. Without that education and training, that should include interpreting abilities, like we can imagine, that are very specific and different to conference interpreting, as I said, but they also include protocols on how to do telephone interpretation because it's not the same thing as doing a simultaneous interpretation when you have several parties in the same call. The code of ethics, how to behave on the phone, the use of a platform, customer service, all of that type of training, education today is being provided by the call centers themselves, by the companies that are hiring them. Why? Because it does not exist outside in reality. When all of this conference interpretation began, we didn't have a university first and the master's degree first and then the profession. The profession began first and then universities came online and master's degrees were developed. And the same thing is happening here. We're at a time when there was no offerings from educational universities. So the call centers themselves, the companies themselves began to develop their own programs. The great majority of the large agencies or ISE interpretation services providers have internal training programs. These are programs that are very long, very many hours. It's a scaled training in the sense that they're not going to let the person immediately begin to take phone calls. For example, medical ones, that's the most sophisticated ones. Normally, they classify their clients. So I don't know. And the company where I work, we have the city of Toronto as a client. And one of the branches in the city are all our residential services that might involve people that are dialing because they don't know what day the garbage, our organic garbage service goes by and what day is the day for pickup of recyclable garbage and where they can get garbage can because they require a special one, or they need to know if they need to move their car because the truck is going to come by to clean up the snow in the winter. That kind of call are simpler, or even to write to register their children's service, community services in swimming classes, in summer courses. So agencies or these contact centers or call centers, what they do is they classify their clients and the interpreters that are recently trained. They're giving them certain types of calls, they test them out. But above all, there's a lot of quality control. There's huge teams, listening interpreters, calls, giving them feedback, and they don't let them move forward until they get another training session and several more hours of training. So then they go on to the next level, etc. And I'm telling you all of this because there are many very large companies, like everything in this world, that are very good, that have excellent training programs. And of course, there's others that do not. And that happens throughout the world and in all professions and everywhere. I know that there's a lot, companies like mine, it's very small, where we do not have the resources to be able to train from zero to those bilingual people. So we do only hire people that are already interpreters that are educated. Very often that education comes because they worked in another large agency that did train them. That's what our reality is. And then we develop them. For me, this is the first point on the first controversy that I would like to share with you, and I hope you could see it as I see it. I think that when we began to interpret and we began to get training as conference interpreters, we were just bilingual people, and very possibly not so bilingual or so good because we just reinforce our world, our language every single day by working and looking for professional development. If we could do it, why can't they? I just want to leave that on the table for you to think about. And I think that is the only thing that's required is information and training. Is that enough? Of course it's not. It will never be enough because it's not enough for conference interpreters for them or for anybody else. In this world, we need to continuously be developing. What are these webinars that the CIMIC is organizing is about? It's about this, to be able to motivate ourselves and to do continuous development, because that is the magic of continuing professional development. We need to be willing to continue to grow, to continue to learn for more. There'd be more associations for us to have more research and more associations now for telephone interpreters, video interpreters, for there to be more courses on this type of interpretation in large universities, for classes and courses to be developed at all levels until it gets up to the most professional level, and we can even have a master's, and this would be great for there to be certification on, and there should be institutions that be willing to have workshops and practice groups. We always need more, just like in everything else. Now, in the United States, there is certification, formal certification for telephone interpreters here. I've put two examples that are under certifying telephone interpreters that are not based in the United States. In Spanish, of course, which is one of the main languages that is being certified. But I think that there's a lot more to be done, and very possibly we need to develop something in Mexico and in all countries. If you'd like, I can share this data with you later on, because it's really interesting to say it does exist and we need to have more. Okay, but right now you're gonna say, okay, right. But I wonder what the working conditions are, the hours of work, salaries, how about audio, and many things that you're not covering. I know it's still not perfect. I never said it was, nor am I trying to say that. But I want to tell you what I think the future can be like and what I think today is like. We talk about work conditions. First, we need to understand that we need to think of two types of OPI and VRI interpreters that will be those that work as staff that are hired as full-time employees, and those are independent or freelancers, because that also changes a great deal with respect to work conditions. In my experience, the great majority are freelancers, the great majority. So labor conditions is something that they will determine. That's very different. There are formal employees, yes, but that's the minority. And there's still a lot of road to be walked there, because everybody in the profession needs to work on this, but there are shifts, there are rests. We need to think of ergonomic workstations and work situations, providing the right headsets for them to work. And all of these conditions are very different depending on each agency. In this, I do agree. It's very variable, but it's also very variable because there's our employee interpreters and freelancers. But I think the most important issue that we all want to know about is the cognitive load. How much effort is the interpreter putting forth when they're interpreting, and why do they take so long or more or less time, or how many interpreters are required? So we can think about consecutive interpretation for a conference. I said that we're going to talking about consecutive only here. So here we're going to do a comparison between a consecutive interpretation for a conference. So when we're thinking about a consecutive interpretation for a conference, normally this is what comes to our mind. This type of notes that interpreters take. But if we think of interpretation per se, normally we're not expecting to have a word for word interpretation, right? We're expecting for the interpreter to eliminate the garbage, that's repetition, all of that can be removed. We hope that the interpreter will have used formal language. It needs to be a certain tone, a high formal tone. And normally, the duration of the speech that is interpreted should be shorter than what was originally said. What happens on OPI or VRI? It's different because it becomes more like court interpretation. In court interpretation, an OPI and VRI, it has to be word for word. This changes the context completely. And here I want to say something that's really important. And by word for word, I'm referring to meaning with significance, not, well, because then I've had interpreters that say, if they're asked in English, and I'm sorry, I want to apologize to interpreters for change in language, but they're asked in English, they interpreted that as, with who are you married with? In other words, I don't want that. I want this to be have meaning. You need to have everything because we can't remove the garbage. And OPI, VRI, we cannot remove anything, we can't omit anything, but we cannot add anything either. So it has to have the same duration. So what is the challenge? This is one of the challenges, one of the major challenges for telephone interpretation. One of the big challenges is this, but many other very possibly you haven't thought of. Telephone interpretation is a very complex interpretation. Just imagine not only what I just told you about going word for word, but also, first, we need to maintain the tone. This means that we need to have interpreters that have a very, very broad range of terminology and vocabulary. That means that if a patient comes to a doctor and they have all the terminology as though they had studied medicine themselves, the interpreter needs to also be able to say with that same level of precision, because a doctor needs to know what the patient understands and well, we'll understand what he's saying. But if my grandmother walks in and she uses small village terminology and she uses a very simple words, the interpreter has to use the same words because the doctor needs to understand at what tone he's being spoken to so he can speak in the same way to the patient for the patient to understand him. Not only that, but we're very accustomed in conferences for the origin, the English is perfect. If this is, we always get a native speaker, somebody that's speaking beautiful English. But here, the great majority of the service providers in these countries that are full of migrants, English is their second or third language. So their English has a huge accent. So that also makes it difficult to understand. And not only that, we're interpreting for people that speak many varieties of the language. In Spanish, it could be, now you need to understand Venezuelans, Colombians, Argentinians, Mexicans, and all of them are going to have their own different terminology, different words to say a stomachache. So this is a huge challenge for telephone interpreters that very often that we don't really pay attention to or we ignore. Another great challenge is that they need to have greater training in note taking. Their calls, once again, are short. So sometimes you get used to, and the interpretation segments are short, but once you get Anna Polo coming in that talks at 1,000 miles an hour, that loves to talk about the entire story of their life and her grandmother's life and neighbor's life, the interpreter cannot go on because it's very long segments. And they do not have the skill of taking, and that's a challenge. But if we want to link this to cognitive load and how difficult or easy it is, or what kind of load the interpreter and the telephone interpretation has, what I can tell you is that the big difference is the telephone interpreter does have control. It has their hands on the steering wheel during the call. And the conference, we have no control. We can't tell the prime minister, wait a minute, I need to, what did you say? Excuse me, what was the name of that you just mentioned? Could you just repeat that number? I didn't write it down. We cannot stop a conference. We cannot stop a speech. Whereas in a telephone interpretation and video interpretation, precisely because you require a high level of precision, the interpreter has the control. So the interpreter has the control. They can ask for repetitions, they can ask for clarification, they can ask for a pause when there's a very long segment. It says, excuse me, I'm going to ask you to pause. I'm going to interpret what you've just said up to this point, and in a moment you can continue. The interpreter has a control of the shifts. Wait a minute, I'm going to interpret this in just a moment. I'll give you the mic back. And the interpreter can also ask them to improve the quality of audio. Say, excuse me, could you speak louder? Can we do a test? Like, can you get closer to the microphone? There's a lot of different things within the cognitive load that the interpreter can control. The interpreter can help to reduce that load. Now, if we think of that cognitive load with respect to work shifts, because when we think, know how much are they working, how many hours, we could think of a complete conference, a complete day, compared to telephone interpreters also working full time. I can say if we think that simultaneous interpretation doing everything really quickly, it's a very much a higher cognitive load, and we need more interpreters to be able to cover a certain shift. If we think that telephone interpretation, that cognitive load is better distributed, there's more spacing between it, there's space between calls, there's very short segments that are very easy to repeat compared to the long segments. There are very few of those. You might think that there not need a lot of interpreters, but I have to be very honest. I don't know what the right answer is. I think we do need more interpreters to be able to find a perfect balance here. The same thing I tell you with respect to salary. Salaries, what I can say is that yes, the salaries will depend a great deal in the countries where the interpreters are located. Their experience, yes. Their options for growth, yes. And telephone interpreters can grow. There's categories for telephone interpreters, and they can earn more or less depending how many certifications they have, what kind of calls they can take, if they have more languages, if they can also do on-demand video. That's a profession that's growing that has a huge potential. Companies are asking for this. And as I said, now we're going to have on-demand VRI. This is just a doctor selects it, pushes a button on the language. On the other side, you'll see a language interpreter right then. It's magical. And if the interpreters also accept to do videos, they can earn more. Now, I know I don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to speak about audio. I know that's a whole other issue that is very controversial at this time. We know that there are auditory injuries because of quality of audio, and especially in platforms. I think that rose a great deal during the pandemic. We began to do a lot of studies, especially in RXI, to see if it was possible to do simultaneous interpretation remotely with platforms. A lot of studies have been done that have demonstrated that the quality of the audio waves are not good. And the same thing happens in telephone interpretation. The truth is, I don't think there's enough studies that can still tell us what is the quality of those waves. But what we do know, however, is that we can take advantage of what has already been done internationally. The International Association of Conference Interpreters, AIC, has many studies and have recommendations on brands of headsets, brands of microphones that are better for interpreters. You can find these on the AIC website, and there's also a lot of equalizers that can be bought with any supplier that can be put at your home to adapt the waves and the sound. And I do understand it, unfortunately. We still have to defend our rights, to look for our equipment. I want to encourage you to motivate your companies because change needs to come from us because they're our ears. And we can also motivate companies. I can say that, at least in my company, we have also sought to help the interpreters if necessary. We can help to, we can try to better quality of audio. We know that on the other side, the service provider can be on the phone or on the street.
And if we are remembering that telephone and video has focused more in the medical area and then the migrating area, then we have to talk more about the topic. There has to be more awareness, more formation. We have to start taking care of ourselves, our physical and mental and emotional health as interpreters of each and every one of the branches. We have to take control of our life. And community interpretation, OPI, VRI, or in person has a great additional load. We do not always follow the patients during the whole disease, but it's a very difficult migration situations on street where they cannot eat, and us as interpreters have to be prepared and to find ways in order to support ourselves and to be able to find ways and roads, because yes, this is a reality and you're going to say, I knew it, I knew it. I knew that there were a lot of things that were not decisive and it's not perfect. And it's a new branch of interpretation that it's a profession which is very, very young, but it's a very young branch and it is growing as foam. Demand is incredible and it's here to stay. And it's our responsibility, our moral responsibility, and the missioners of conference and the visionaries, we have a road open in such way that we have to take our brothers from the parallel universe and support them in order for them to grow also in their world and to have better conditions, better wages, better salaries, and improve their health. So we have to work together to do it together because we cannot do it by ourselves. We are brothers. We have to hold our hands. And as I repeat, and I will repeat it once and again, and we have to make all the interpreters professional, adding value, creating community with formation in order for this to be reflected in creation and implementation and justice for all. And we have it in our hands. We have to do it in our hands. And I just want to thank you for listening to me today and to be able to feel a little bit of my passion. I love this topic. And we're open to questions now. I want to congratulate you before anything else. Dan, I was so very pleased that you stepped on so many feet of the interpreters, conference interpreters. Registration has to be done in every interpretation. I've had listened to interpreters that in the language, in the original language, they say, oh, the speaker says, could you be so kind of speaking not so fast? What you just said is the Bible of interpretation, not community interpretation, not over the phone interpretation, but every kind of interpretation, because interpretation is interpretation and it's applied to everything. What happens is that what the interpreters, conference interpreters, I only work in conference interpretation in the United States and in the United Nations. No, this is not true. I had done some things that you didn't mention. I had something very interesting with the Secretary of State in Mexico and one from the United States. In a park with a phone on the one hand, on the other phone on the other hand, doing the interpretation that you could call over the phone interpretation or whatever, because I had to go through a phone that would not be intervened. So this is important, and you struggle against audio. Everyone hates me, and the other one, and the other one, and the other one, and we are professionals of the ears and the voice. So we have to take care. You are deaf and you won't be nor consecutive nor conference, nothing. And if you are mute, the same thing happens. So I really, really thank you for this openness, opening the eyes of so many interpreters. And we have to know what we do, and it's a gender which is inferior because really it's a burden. How many conferences we know and how many conferences we have interpreted. And you have not even born when I started this. And you touch things that they say pure stupidity, or like the Peruvians say, tails and heads of a fish. We have to learn that. For example, it's not only to register, but also in international conferences, we are facing, I've traveled all over Latin America and I was in contact with every kind of countries, and people start working in the colloquial language. I wrote a small manual about Proverbs, and you just talked about this, that is the Bible. You're going to criticize the indigenous or of originary people that went to live to California, and her original language is Nahuatl, and she turns around and says, what happened with my daughter? She is not very good in her body. Oh, she doesn't talk very well. No, no, sirs. And we are not critical nor improvers of everything. And it's very important because I'm desperate with these interpreters, vedettes, and these interpreters that think that they are the only ones that know everything. I heard an interpreter that said that all the interpreters that did not use the inclusive language were mediocre. Oh, come on. I said, what? What? This is your opinion, but not the opinion of others. If the person uses as a speaker an inclusive language, you have to use it. But if not, you should not use it. And I want to, I will silence myself because, TANETS was one of the most eye-opener conferences that I have heard in my life. And remember, if you do it, if you don't learn how to train yourself, there comes artificial intelligence and robots, and they will eat you. Someone told me, I don't know if it was Esther Alvarez, and I said, through a phone, you dictate and then you do that? Yes, it's true. It's happening like so. The translators are really suffering with interpretation over the phone and artificial intelligence. As they say, when you see your birds cutting, please put yours to in yeah, yeah, I'm so thrilled that I think I will silence myself. I don't know what we can do. Should we open the microphone? There are a lot of questions in the chat as you want, and as I said, I will silence myself. Thank you, Ana Paula. I think that we are all in agreement that this talk has been great. And there are some point that sometimes us conference interpreters they also put and curb the interpreters that they start, and then this is why they take advantage of the companies. So, well, thank you so much, Ana Paola, for everything that you have talked about. Among the questions that we have in the chat that they have been doing during your presentation, the first one is, which are these controversies? Because I consider that they were mentioned, but I don't know if you can answer very punctually the questions of which are the main controversies that exist. Among conference interpreters and over the phone or VRI interpretation, because they also mentioned what you mentioned is like every professional has to face and they have to know. And I think that it's important to highlight part of what you were saying, that many times it starts in the OPI or VRI without having preparation. I don't know if you want to talk about arrogance. And before you answer, a favor, if anyone wants to pose a question, you can put your sign of raising your hand so you can have the floor and you have your camera. Sorry, Ana Paola. And well, yeah, arrogance. I think that's very important. Controversies are the controversies that we have of prejudice in the conference interpretation. And I think that the comment that you say in the professional environment, I think that this is from a over the phone interpreter is what they request, minimum to be professional. Controversies and the problem we have them in interpretation, and we have to say that their work is not as professional and that they are not trained, that they only hire bilingual people, that they do not comply with time schedules, that they have a very huge cognitive load, and that they the salary or the wages are not equivalent to what they do. And of course, there are so many topics that are controversial of things that are outside of our hands. So what I can tell you is that I don't have the answer to everything, but what I think is that in the years that I've had developing call centers and over the phone interpreters, there has been a growth. They have increased and they have more accreditation. And yes, it can be done. So I think that myself, I have seen the pressure of the customers to the agencies demanding better quality interpreters and demanding they are paid more because they want quality interpreters, and simply and plainly the interpreters that don't have a good quality and are not trained. And like in our world, I think that this is very important that we have to take into account. And then again, these are the main controversies. Just to summarize the controversies. So it opens the door to the conditions and the payment. There are many companies now that there are companies from the United States mainly that are hiring interpreters in Mexico or in Latin American countries because they hire them for the whole time, but as freelance, but whole time. You don't have any benefit, nothing. And salary that they are receiving is very low for the work that you do in Mexico. It's extremely difficult. It's very extenuating. The load that they have, there are some that even they start in worse conditions before they paid like, I don't know, 8 hours. And now of the 8 hours, I will only pay the time that they're interpreting. And which is the advice that you can give us? What could we do in order to match this between the outsourcers that are the ones that are hiring, because they are not directly the companies from the United States, but with outsourcers that are giving terrible conditions to interpreters, and that this will decrease what they are doing and they suffer a lot. And in everything, and the thing is to do community and gather forces and create unions or whatever is needed to professionalize all this. So first of all, to professionalize, what I've seen is that the interpreters that have certifications in the United States, of course, they don't work anymore for the outsourcer. They work directly with the company of the United States, and they hire him directly from the bridge company, to say it in some way. So it also exists the one that wants to pay 2 pesos, or conditions where they want a person to be 6 hours interpreting by themselves. This exists everywhere, but we all have to know each other to give the value to ourselves and to find a way to professionalize ourselves. So we have to create the formation, or we have to work with the universities in order to create more formation programs and certifications and accreditation. It's gonna be a long journey. It's not immediate, but I want you to know that internally, the great hospitals of the United States ask the great companies to leave the outsourcers that have bad conditions of bad quality. We'll have to work together, support ourselves, and create a strong union, and this will generate changes. I'm going to continue with the questions that we have in the chat, and then I'll pass the floor. What if we alternate? Let's pass the floor to Mariela. She was the first one that raised her hand, and then one chat and one live. Okay? Mariela, please go ahead. Could you please put your camera? Yes. Thank you. With the beautiful hair that you have. Thank you so much. Good night. How are you, colleagues? I want to thank you, but especially the passion with which you presented the topic. This is really nice. Very little people present this from the intimate. We noticed, and you start explaining that you got there and you had to work, you had to produce, and you found something. You took it to the maximum potency because you wanted to improve your working place, your workplace, and the working conditions of the people that at that moment were your peers. And for me, that's priceless. It's fantastic. So I have the doubt, the question, because I have had some community interpretation classes. Where or how can you separate the call center, the phone calls, or the OPI from the community interpretation? Because what you were talking about, adequating the language, the level of language that we're going to use. And I'm not very clear with this because I have worked in call center. I started in Costa Rica working for a company that's called Sykes that gave services to Microsoft and other companies, interpreting and it was a normal language. So when we went to the community interpretation, when I was studying community interpretation, that's where we have to level the language. So I'm not very clear on what you're doing. You still have in the call center over the phone interpretation, or you're heading more for the community? Thank you so much. Thank you for your question. In reality, what happens is that video and OPI are like branches of the community interpretation. It's like a modality to offer community interpretation, can be given in person or by video, and they are part of this. So this is what I'm talking about with over the phone interpretation. Instead of being there, they do it over the phone or video remote interpretation. Thank you so much. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you for your question. I totally agree. There are a lot of comments thanking for this freshness and this passion that you transmitted in your message. And in fact, we had Georgian Weller, and she works a lot with the languages like Nahuatl and all. And she also thanks you so much because she thinks it's very important. And everything that you're doing, community interpretation, is very valuable in public services when you do it with the eagerness of serving the persons. You are teaching us this with everything that you're doing. They're also asking us, sorry, Tania, continuing with what you said, this conference, you saw that Alan, president of PIT in North America, the first week of October would be in Monterey, California. The meeting of Machen, which is the new generation or the next generation, is devoted to the indigenous languages interpreters. And it would be worthwhile. There is a representation from Canada. We're going to take an interpreter, Georgiana and myself. We're going to take an interpreter, Nahuatl from the Huasteca with Spanish. So it would be worth it that everyone that's listening to us know that exists this new conference. I'm going to send you through everyone the invite in order for you to see what we're talking about. And I hope that you also go there, Tanya, and that we have a good representation. And that you take it with the community people or live, because there are a lot of things that they're doing live, and not only over the phone, but this effort that the FIT in America is doing to have community interpreters, indigenous languages interpreters. If my president Alan allows me, we're gonna give you the training manual for indigenous language interpreters. It's splendid when translating it in Spanish through the CEMIC. Sorry for the interruption, but I think that it's important that we are doing also this here in Mexico, and they're doing also in the United States, and this is a pure jewel. Thank you. Thank you. It will be a pleasure. Thank you so much. It was our advertisement from SID North America. And as Ana Paola was saying, it's very important to gather, to work together, because the union is the force. I'm going to pass the floor to Donatella so you can pose your question, Donatella. Hello, good night. Can you hear me? Yes, okay, thank you so much. First of all, Ana Paola, it was an excellent speech. And I want to tell you that I'm part of a group of almost 500 interpreters of every category. Conference interpreters, community interpreters, and a daily exchange with all these colleagues in some way or the other highlights the problems that the freelancers, interpreters, sorry, Donatella, where are you? In Miami, the United States. Okay, thank you. So then what I was saying is that the exchange with all these colleagues in some way or the other, it always highlights how sometimes they work as conference interpreters and some other times they have to work as community interpreters, and some of them combine with equipment hiring and everything. So the circumstance that torments more, and I want to highlight this topic that really makes the interpreter suffer. The audio, when you work remotely, or the people that speak use the audio of the camera or the equipment that is integrated to the laptop. When someone talks, normally the other one is muted. It's automatic. It's something that really compresses the data. So on the one hand, but how does the interpreter do in order to protect your biggest asset, which are your ears? Next question, how can you control anxiety and emotional load? How can you help? How can you help an interpreter to maintain the calm while they are working? Is not only the traumatism, but how can you control the stress while you're working? It can be unknown number of hours. And in the third place, which are the tools that the interpreters may have in order to try to uniform the rate that they can charge per hour, so the agencies will take care and the freelancers have to take care for people that want to think that they are serious, an enormous quantity of things that, yes, a lot of them participate in the work of the freelance interpreter. Thank you. Thank you, Donatella. I totally agree with respect to the audio. I think that we are the ones that have to look for good quality headsets, because at the end of the story, we are now the owners of our ears. While we achieve to generate the impact in the companies that are the ones that at the end should give the equipment, I think that this is something that we have to keep on looking for, because I insist, what can I do remotely with the platforms? And I do community interpretation over the phone interpretation. If audio quality is different, and what do I mean? I don't suffer so much in the community interpretation like in the simultaneous interpretation. I don't know if it's the cognitive load or the effort that I'm doing that is different. But yes, I think that we have to make more studies. What happens with exactly audio compression? How does the platform manage that have over the phone? How is it managed by the other platforms and the brands? And in the AI page, there are a series of headsets approved of different prices. And I recommend that you invest not only for yourself, but for the ones that listen to you, because their voice can reach or can hurt someone, not someone that only listens to a call, but you that are listening all the time. With respect to standardizing the wages, I think that it depends where you are based, that almost everyone talk about the English language. We have to professionalize. The only way of justifying a company and that the company justifies before their customer higher rates is having certified interpreters with obviously from the hardest ones to have from the United States, but certifications that are so easy to get, and every certification keep up this law of the United States for the workers of the health area, which is Health Insurance for Disability and Accountability Act, which is very common in the United States. It's called HICPAC. And there are a lot of certifications when an interpreter has KIPAC. They have more, they are offered more. And I think that this is the next topic. And how to be calm. What works for me, maybe it will not work for you, because this is something very personal. But I think that we have to find our center. We have to find what makes us calm as human beings. And if we're going to interpret in communities, I think that we have to be warned that one day will be something. You have to interpret something that you have to be prepared, because it will really impact you. So I tell my interpreters, if it works for you to stand up and start walking with what the cable gives you, because you have to take it with movement, walk. But you have to keep on walking. If you have an anti-stress ball, have it. If you need to finish the call and say, I have to disconnect 5 minutes because I have to go out and yell, we're going to give you 5 minutes so you can yell or cry or whatever you need. But it's work, a teamwork, as we say. How are we going to change the agencies? They have to understand with studies and to share about the impact that these conversations have in the interpreter at this moment. I think that we have to do more research, more professionalization, more knowledge, and there is a great road ahead. It's not only a IC, we also do a lot of things in SEMIC. So I invite you to check our YouTube channel. We were the first. And I want to acknowledge Roberto Rivero. That was the first one that impelled me, because we had a series of recommendations, remote interpretation, remote RSI, remote simultaneous interpretation. There are also remote consecutive interpretation, RCI. Some of the things that we have to do with respect to the prices. And when they hire you, when I was an agency, well, we say, okay, how much do you charge? And through webinars, seminars, and in Canada, we are with people of South America, Central America, how much are we charging? In Mexico, we have suffered a lot because the income has decreased 30%, and we are charging less, much less in Mexican pesos. And it's very important that in a given moment we are united and we can say, how much are we charging? This is a taboo. And even for just in the United States, we cannot have a fixed rate. So what is worthwhile is that we have groups where we say, we are charging for this, that. Okay, I won't charge less than this. Okay, you get what you want to get. So this is very important. It's not that they tell you how much you have to charge, but the rate among us is so much. And this is why it's so important that we are together in this kind of conferences, okay? Sorry for the participation. And there is something that really opens a perspective to keep on hiring here in Mexico and Latin America. To start certifications, for example, between RSI, even if you are not there, sometimes you think that, okay, in my country, we don't have certifications that can do this. How can I achieve this? From there, you're giving us key information for those of us that do want to abound on this interpretation, how to prepare yourself, how to certify yourself, and how to stop working for the outsourcers because they are the ones that are in worse conditions, and to work for the company in the United States or in the original country, and to improve the conditions of the interpreters. And they agree with all this. And this is important what you're saying, that we don't have closed doors. Because we are not in the United States or in Canada, we have to work for this company. Something else that they are asking, what is exactly community interpretation, video interpretation? In what kind of situations do you mainly use video interpretation? And if you are not in a call center, for example, you are on call waiting for videos and for calls. If you have a fixed schedule, or what can we do? Okay, yes, of course. Basically, yes. It's community interpretation is to help people to receive basic services that they can receive in their community, meetings with the parents at school, and the best residential services. And almost always there is economic assistance for the migrants. To enter the clinics, the hospital. Many calls of economic attendance with the banks, like the daily life. How to perform daily life, migrant sessions, and all these kind of situations, emergency calls, real emergencies. And even if you are at a call center, you are on call, waiting for the call to enter. In reality, yes, it's the same. You're working either in a call center and freelance, at home, or in a company. The model is the same. There is an interpreter in front of a computer connected to a platform, and then the doctor calls the professor or the service provider. They request the language, and the call enters directly to the interpreter, and the other one connects or calls the people that does not talk locally, and the call starts. I want to invite you, Ana Paula, so please write us 600 words, a small article for magazine Norte America. And I have the pride of coordinating it. So if you can also talk about which are the entities before you can certify the call centers. And we have to invite you that you are a member of the Colegio Mexicano de Intérpretes de Conferencias. We have a lot of people outside. Yes, thank you, of course. Thank you so much. We'll pass the floor to Danny. Danny, your camera, and tell us
Annie,
where you
turn
come
on your
from.
camera and tell us where you're located. Good evening to all of you. Can you hear me okay? Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the speaker for what a great, brilliant talk. And my interest in participating in this event is because I work as an interpreter, but in sign language. Even though I've focused on telephone, I'm not really focused on telephone interpretation. We share many different things. Daniel, sorry, where are you located? Yes, I'm in La Paz, Bolivia, and it's Bolivian sign language. Yes, that's correct. No, thank you. And first and foremost, I'd like to say to ask if we can have more of these types of experiences so we can exchange experiences, because a lot of things that we've spoken of still helps us a lot. And we still have times where we need a lot of information, the experience that is short or very valuable for all of us. And perhaps a question for our colleague is how can we, I don't know if the word is to pacify or find that balance between what our users are requiring. Danny, you froze up. There, we have him back. Danny, can you repeat your question? I got stuck with finding pacifying between what the users are requiring. And he's frozen up again. I can't hear you, Danny. Sorry. Danny, your audio cut off. I don't know if you do chat, if you would like to write your comment, and then we can get Anna Pao to start to answer there, because we just have 7 minutes left. So if we could please let Sophia Sanchez please turn on your camera and tell us where you're contacting us from. Can you hear me okay? I look a little bit yellow, but there we go. I'm talking from Tapachula, Chiapas in Mexico. And I think I'm also a medical interpreter. And I've worked for 2 years in this area. Originally, I am a translator. So all of this that what you said at the beginning about arrogance that we have between conference interpreters, that really was something that that touched my heart, but something was told me in my professional education. They said interpretation is a really closed guild and it's very elitist. And I didn't really understand that. But now with this talk, I think it's been made really clear to me what they were referring to. And with all the comments about remote interpretation, I felt bad because I understand this, because many of my colleagues don't have this preparation. I thank you very much, but that does not mean that I'm doing poor work. As a matter of fact, because perhaps this type of interpretation is not something I really enjoy as much as I do, for example. But I really felt identified with many things you said, even things that I wasn't aware of with respect to hearing, for example. And I'm going to go to the audiologist now because I think it's really important. And I was the one that made a comment about the tremendous disparity in salaries. And they were talking about mental health, for example. I was telling my friends and my family members, they said, yeah, they said, why are you saying you're tired if I don't see that you're just sitting there? And for me, it's like telling you have no idea of how tiring it is. And now this cognitive burden, definitely, and also vicarious trauma, we feel overcome by the situation. There's a beautiful time where I'm in the labor room, I'm hearing the babies being born, and I hear him crying for the first time. That's like magical. And there's other times where I've had to give a bad news that their child died. So they're very difficult situation that the company doesn't really prepare us for this. The doctor says this happens, and then yes, you can't refuse to say it. Sophia, what languages do you work in? English, Spanish? You don't work on any indigenous languages in your land? No, not at all. So with all of this, it was really useful to me, and I really want to thank you for this conversation. So I thank you very much, all of you, because today I know that this burden that I feel is I feel that I can't go any further on. We used to have 12-hour shifts, and now I can't even deal with my 6-hour shift because that seemed the burnout has really overwhelmed you. And so that I can now know that there's an explanation for that. So thank you very much. And I do have a very specific question, which is about certification. I know it's CCHI, but I don't know in your experience, Anna Paul, how I'm not gonna say the name of my company, but how I know you live in Canada. As a matter of fact, one of my plans was to go to Canada. So how can, besides of getting a CCHI certification, what other certification can you get? When the people say, well, if you can try it, you're not gonna, don't get it, that's okay. But it's not a 200 peso exam. Sometimes with preparation, everything, a colleague said that they invest about 20,000. And so I said, is it worthwhile? Yes, of course it is. But I know it's not available for everybody because of disparities I was talking about on salaries in between the United States and Mexico. It's literally, we earn a third or fourth part of what they earn. I tell them, don't pay me what you're paying them, but at least give me half or 2/3 of what they're earning, or or half of what you're paying them, because that way I don't have to work for 12 hours to earn what I would earn in 6-hour shifts. So how can we handle that more or less? Because when we're talking about asking the company into the group, we're going to get together. Nobody wants to do it because our contract says that at any time you can be fired without any advance notice. They pay you the days that you've been working, and that's it. There's no um, severance pay. There's absolutely nothing. You worked, and that was it. Goodbye, and the world is over with. So what can we do? The truth is, I do understand what you're saying. It's difficult. Costs for the accreditation that exists today are high. It's not that they're so difficult. In reality, what I have seen is that any interpreter that has a level of experience that you have can pass that test as long as you see what you're being asked for. I think very often all of these exams are more than anything knowing what are the protocols that they're expecting and the terminologies that they're expecting in the test, then they're a lot easier that way. That it is an investment, yes, without a doubt, but you're going to invest more if you begin to take all the courses separately. I think that the main objective would be to look for a demo. There's many online of those exams of their models, and prepare yourself. You can achieve anything, get as high as you want to go as if you have your own notes and practice. I know it's not always easy to pay for those very costly training programs in the United States. I'm going to pay a lot for them certifications. So it's better to learn to look for how to find the tips, the techniques, so that we can grow and do it. I think it's worthwhile. I've I've also down the National Council for Interpreting in Healthcare, which is also very good. It's a little bit more economical than the other one. But I do believe that, like you say, in terms of salaries, you're going to have to be testing different agencies and, as I said, create our own in Mexico. Truly, I want to encourage all of you because at the end of the day, remember, we live in a global market and we can't just everything in the hands of a little group. And just like conferences began very small and now it's all over the place and has grown, let's do the same thing and create our own agencies and grow and put in create our own classes at universities. We want more people when that wants to be a trainer and now wants to share knowledge. And now we can join large universities and look for us to have our own certifications in Mexico. Why not? If a lot of the interpreters now come from Latin America, then let's to do this. So that's the next step. I know that it sounds like a dream, but I think that we need to open that blaze the trail, and I really recommend that you continue to look and practice. No, it's not a dream. This is something that CIMIC is working on with Fit North America, and between us, we have members from Fit North America. We have the Intercontinental University, which is the university that's working on this, and we are preparing a protocol so that we can certify along with an association that exists for 42 years and the university that's helping us. And very soon we're going to give you surprises in that respect. Mexico is growing and we're working very seriously about this, and it is not a dream. Not only do conference interpreters are going to be qualified if they're AIC, if there's a MIC, or from wherever, but we're going to have certification for other types of interpretation as well. So we're preparing this, and this is why it's so important to have your contribution. I really thank Tanya so much that was working and preparing all of this conference. She did a splendid work for it. So it's no dream. Very soon, our dreams will become reality. Thank you very much. I think we've finished, Tanya, right? If you could please close by thanking Ana Paula for this magnificent talk. And I particularly want to thank you for stepping on people's toes. Thank you so much. Good evening for the time being. And remember, Fit North America is open for whatever you want with us. And please write an article for us because your voice needs to be heard, not just ours. I promise I will. I think there's a lot of things left on the back burner, a lot of questions. The time was not going to, we were not going to have enough time to be able to, there's so many things still to talk about. We thank you immensely for your openness, your willingness, and thank you also for this group, Fit North America group, that opened the doors for us to be able to speak of this topic that we really wanted to talk about and put on the table. And thank you so much for sharing everything on how we truly, I think you made this really clear for us. You talked about many points that we needed to discuss. And so we thank you so much for all your openness, all your frankness, and also to create hope for everything that we need to develop, thanks to all the work that you have also been doing. I would like to thank our interpreters as well, that we had interpreters from Spanish to English. We had Esther Alvarez and Sharon Hall. Thank you very much. We would not been able to disseminate all this knowledge if it were not for you. We also had Mexican Sign Language. We had Vanessa Gonzalez and Ruby Maldonado. Thank you very much for your work, which is time that was donated on behalf of the Guild and for the Guild. And we thank you also for all the work you're doing. If I may, I would like to say thank you to all, to the interpreters, English, Spanish, sign language interpreters, and Sergio, thank you, Tanya, and for everybody that's here. We are one single community. We're going to join together, work together, and grow together and support each other. Really, thank you. And here I am, and whatever you need, we're glad to help you. Thank you very much. Let me just take another one too. Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful conference. Good evening, everyone. And let's have, we can go to rest and see Tanya send us by email what your question was. We'll be able to get it answered for you. Thank you. Good evening and a very happy month of September that will start in just a few hours.